again affecting the neuronal sheaths, and the same way the conduction mechanism along the nerves. And lastly, an important, obstetric causes, because during delivery, when there is passage of head and after head the neck is there, then taking out neck properly and safely from the vaginal opening is very crucial, because excessive pressure or excessive traction in taking out the neck can cause tear in this nerve fibers in a newborn. As it is a newborn, the fibers are soft and fragile, so they can get tear up easily. So that's why obstetric causes again are very important nowadays. Let us see this obstetric first paralysis, which is seen in uh, obstetric mechanism, is Erb's paralysis. Just now we have discussed about a point which is called as Erb's point. Now Erb's point, if get damaged, suprascapular is going to get lesion, nerve to subclavius is going to get lesion, roots are going to get affected. So C5, C6, C5 is going to give you dorsal scapular nerve as well as a contribution to the phrenic nerve. So those lesions are going to get produced along with the divisions, and the various cords and branches arising from those divisions can get affected. So Erb's paralysis is basically going to take place due to damage to the upper trunk of the uh, brachial plexus, basically C5 and involving C6 too. Most common injury in the Erb's paralysis is because of birth injury, fall on a shoulder, a direct fall on a shoulder, and anesthetic block in the neck root surgeries that can also cause damage to the Erb's point. So this is a pic which is showing you an injury during birth. So excessive, you can see the traction after the head is out. Now the neck has been stretched out too much to give traction or tension in those area, which can cause tearing up or damage to the nerve rootlets coming out from the spinal cord. So that is one way in which the injury can take place. And this is the way in which a person falls from height on its shoulder. So you can make out this portion is going to get stretched again like this. So distance between the neck and the shoulder is going to increase, and this traction is going to stretch the nerve fibers, ultimately leading to their tearing. So these are the two traction injuries which can take place in Erb's paralysis. How the patient present with? The patient present in following condition, but what will be the effect? The paralysis of the muscles of the arm mainly, and partly the forearm and the shoulder. So here, what deformity the patient present in is waiter's tip deformity or policeman tips deformity. Here, the arm is medially rotated, forearm is extended, and hand is pronated. So this is the condition the patient present with. This is the typical picture of Erb's paralysis in adult. The arm is medially rotated, forearm is extended, and the hand region is pronated. You can see like a weighted tip. This is the way in which the patient present with. Next, in a newborn, if you say, both bilateral or unilateral damage can take place in taking out the neck from the vaginal opening. So this is the patient, a small child, showing you congenital Erb's paralysis. So you can see both hand classically showing you waiter's tip deformity. How nicely you can see the forearm is extended, arm is medially rotated, and the hands are showing you pronated conditions. Okay, so this is the Erb's paralysis seen in patients. The next obstetric paralysis seen is Klumpke's paralysis. Again, here the trunk involved is lower trunk, basically the T1, partly the C8. Causes of the Klumpke's paralysis are sudden hyperabduction. If you're falling from a height and you suddenly grip or hold something while falling, then a jerk is uh, shown, or jerk is felt on this area when you hold the object. So sudden hyperabduction can take place during that period. Birth injury, again the same way. So this is the way in which the hyperabduction of the arm is seen. You can make out this, again stretching of the arm is taking place, which can cause the nerve tearing. And in case of birth injury, when the head is out, but now you are taking out the baby while pulling the hand out of the opening. So pulling the hand out of opening and taking baby out can cause again the traction injuries, which can result in damage to the nerve rootlets. So again, these are the things which need to be taken care of for clump case paralysis to happen. What are the effects seen in clump case paralysis? Here, the hand muscles are basically involved. So skillful work of the patient is generally affected. Small muscles which are involved in small works. So paralysis of flexors of wrist and fingers are affected. So you can imagine if you can't flex your fingers, various movements, writing, playing instruments, painting, all those are affected. So paralysis of wrist and fingers muscles are seen. And a deformity present here in this condition is claw hand deformity. Now claw hand deformity are produced because of two things: ulnar nerve damage and a median nerve damage. I'm not going to go into details. We'll discuss this later. But the claw hand is the condition in which you can see this pic. This is the diagrammatic presentation in which you can make out there is extension at the metacarpophalangeal joint. You can say not extension, even hyper extended metacarpophalangeal joint. And there is again flexion at interphalangeal joint. So this proximal interphalangeal and distal interphalangeal joints are affected, which undergo this undergo flexion, and these are the joints, metacarpophalangeal joints, which undergo hyperextension. So this is a diagrammatic presentation, and this is the actual view of the patient showing you claw hand deformity. You can easily make out how metacarpophalangeal joint is showing you hyperextension here. Okay, so because small muscles are going to get affected, basically the flexors already mentioned. So if there is imbalance between flexors and extensors action, so if flexors are going to get paralyzed, extension is going to take over it. So the condition is coming like this. Okay, because extension is going to take the part at a higher percentage than the flexor actions. Another damage can take place here is at the root level in case of stab injury that we have told, or a bullet injury or a war injury. That is nerve to the damage to the nerve to the serratus anterior. That is long thoracic nerve or nerve of Bell. So this results in winging of scapula. Why? Because scapula medial border is going to give attachment to the serratus anterior. And when this muscle is getting paralyzed, the medial border traction is now, because of the muscle which is maintained, is now lost. So what happens here is this, the border of the scapula become very prominent as the muscles are paralyzed. So they can't maintain the medial border in their normal position due to their loss of action. Causes of this damage can be heavy loads on shoulder. A very heavy load for a long duration can cause the damage, or a sudden pressure on a shoulder, something which is falling on your back near the shoulder region, a very heavy thing, that can result in nerve damage. So this is the way in which the winging of scapula can be tested. The person who is affected is asked to press against the wall. This is the action in which the serratus anterior is going to show its paralytic effect. That is, the medial border here you can make out is going to get stand out prominently because of loss of the action of the muscle fibers on the medial border. So this is a unilateral winging of scapula, which can be treated, but it is a time-taking procedure. Strengthening and various other exercises are going to be given to the patient. The next Liefert, after Liefert classification, is the Millicy classification. Here, the mechanism is at the root level, basically. So it can be below or prior to the dorsal root ganglion, or it can be after to the dorsal root ganglion. So this is a very important point to understand, because prognosis in those patients play a very important role. Prognosis to the ganglion and prognosis damage post-ganglionic plays a very important role. Preganglionic lesions are because of high-speed injuries seen, vehicular accidents. So preganglionic lesions will have avulsions of the nerve root because it is preganglionic. Dorsal root ganglion, it is prior to that. So totally the connection between the nerve rootlets and the spinal cord is lost. So what happens because of this loss? No proximal stump is seen. So no neuroma formation also. The chances by which the nerve can little bit grow and go to the distal stump, that is totally lost here. And also the Tinel sign which you evoke for checking out the tingling and numbing sensations by percussion, by the process of percussion on nerve, that is also negative in such patients. So the prognosis of this is very poor. And in this case, denervation of the neck muscles is very common because you are totally cutting off nerve supply, as dorsal root ganglion is not going to serve any purpose, even if it's there, because nerve rootlets prior to the ganglion are totally avulsed from the root ganglion. That's why the prognosis become bad. The next is postganglionic after dorsal root ganglion. These are basically traction injuries, excessive stretching of the neck. As I told you, the various ways in which the neck can be stretched out. Nerve roots are intact here. That's why there are some chances or some hope that nerve roots will grow again. Though slow, they can regain the connection with the distal part, and then they can conduct the nerve impulse to the target part. Proximal stump is there, so neuroma formation can take place, which is again a good sign or good thing to happen. So here the prognosis is good, and the Tinel sign here is positive because you can make out some connection is there, not full. Some of the connection between the proximal and the distal part is remaining, as the nerve roots are intact. Here, the deep neck muscles are totally intact. The working is very proper. So prognosis in postganglionic lesion is good, while preganglionic lesion is poor. Injury to the cords now. After roots and trunks and divisions are affected, cords individually can be affected. What can be the various causes of the cords injury? It can be dislocation of the humerus. Again, a vehicular accident can take place, or it can be clavicular fractures, which can cause again damage to the cords. Infraclavicular portion, the damaged portion can go in direction directed downwards, so it can damage the cords there, or arterial aneurysm. So those are axillary artery aneurysm, which can compress the cords again, affecting the conditions. What are the effects seen in the cords? Basically, the muscle paralysis, because the cords are giving out branches directly, so affected muscles are going to get paralyzed. Cutaneous distributions arising from the cords again are going to be there, so sensory loss over those cutaneous distributions. And obviously the vasomotor changes can take place because nerve is going to get affected, so vessel supply is going to get affected, so blood supply according to the blood vessels contraction and relaxation is going to be affected. That's why vasomotor changes can be seen in those areas. So this was about injury to the cords. Then how do a therapist act here, both in pre-surgical and post-surgical cases? Those injuries which are open injuries, stab injuries or war injuries, here a proper surgical approach has to be given to the patient immediately after the injury. But in case of closed wounds, initially the therapist is going to take a roll away to check out whether there is contractures or there is stiffness in the muscle, how he or she can improve the condition along with that duration. So very first thing is the therapist usually teach the patient how unaffected arm for daily activities can be used. Okay, this is again told by therapist, and the basic main and most important thing to get recovered from such injuries is the basic support of the family as well as the mental makeup of the patient. Such patients which are getting paralysis, they are going to get down mentally because they are not able to do their daily activities. So very first point is support and mental makeup of the patients. Then how to use the unaffected arm to carry out their daily activities smoothly. That is to be done by the therapist. Exercises are given to prevent the stiffness, any contractures of the muscle, and to prevent muscle atrophy. The proper positions and uh, movements are told to the patient. Along with that, when you get some strength, you are supposed to, when you maintain some tone of the muscle after giving some exercises, you are supposed to strengthen the muscle activity. So those strengthening exercises by the therapist are also very useful in both pre-surgical and post-surgical scenarios. And lastly, the therapist also gives out supporting devices like splints, compression gloves, or other instruments to prevent the atrophy as well as edema development. So because edema can also lead to the compression effects again. So these are the various uh, ways in which the therapists play an important role in recovering the muscle strength of the patient. So this was all about your brachial plexus. Um, Basically, the divisions, cords, and branches you should be knowing, because pathologies in relation to the various neck root surgeries are also seen. Along with that, we should also know some variations in the brachial plexus, like some patients may show you prefixed or postfixed brachial plexus. Prefix means here C4 component is there, while T1 component is very less. So C4, which is generally not seen, is going to be get added here. That is prefixed. While postfixed, here T2 component is going to show its contribution in formation of the brachial plexus with less contribution of T1. So T2 is going to show a major part. So these prefix, profix are very less seen in the patients, but there are variations which can be found while uh, treating the patients. Usual investigation: CT, MRI, action potential graphs, electromyographies. These are generally done to rule out or to check out various parts of the brachial plexus and the muscles affected by the injury of the brachial plexus. And accordingly, the therapist is told to give out the therapeutic measures to improve the condition of the patients. Thank you for your patience listening. Any questions you can ask?
Thank you, Nilesh sir. I think it was a very nice lecture, and in a very precise manner, you actually covered everything, what needs to be done and what needs to be taught. Definitely, students who are young students, and I think who are not much aware about the clinical symptoms and clinical conditions, they might have some or the other issues pertaining to all these things. But
Yeah.
I think rest is all okay. Yeah, I think we will take questions now. So please tell me, what are the questions? Sir, how does cervical rib affect the brachial plexus?
Okay. Cervical rib is a rib which is not normally present. It is the transverse process of the C7 vertebra which is going to overgrow the first rib, which is generally coming from T1. Now, the lower trunk which is present near the first rib, showing its relation with the first rib upper surface, is going to get compressed with the cervical rib, which is not generally seen. So compression of that part of the brachial plexus, that is basically lower trunk, can affect the functioning of the various nerves coming out from the lower trunk. So this is the way in which the cervical rib is going to present its symptom in a patient. Any other thing?
Any other questions, anyone? We'll just take 2-3 more questions because
Sure,
yeah.
sure, sure. Yeah.
Sir, how does cervical rib affect the brachial plexus?
Same again. I think the same thing is
Yeah.
repeated. Yeah,
I
yeah.
think I have asked the same question. Yeah. Sorry. So any other questions anyone wants to ask? Or do you want some time to, absorb and assimilate whatever has been taught by sir? And that's possible. If you want to ask the questions, you can later mail me or message me all the questions. And
I'll
definitely,
definitely answer it.
we
Yeah.
will definitely
Back
try
with
to
you.
get it answered, and we will definitely take it ahead. So I
Yeah,
think we don't,
sure.
sir, there is one more question. What
Yeah.
is the role of a physiotherapist in treating the Erb's paralysis? I
Okay.
think that is a question that should be better answered by a physiotherapist, because I think Nilesh sir will not be able to give you a clear picture, and that's not his domain either. So I think role of a physiotherapist, I will definitely forward you some of the PDFs or some of the presentations so that you can go through it. But still, I would like to take sir's comment on this one. Sir, please.
Okay. So the question is Erb's paralysis, as I told you. So when a therapist is coming in front of a patient having Erb's paralysis, which is generally seen in newborns, adult Erb's paralysis is very rare. I don't think I have heard about a patient having Erb's paralysis in adult age. So obstetric cases are generally seen in those things. Here, the therapist is going to give again supportive things to the newborn, as well as the various positions and the exercises are taught to the parent, which they can carry out at their home for the concerned newborn. That will be a very effective way to treat the, not completely, but at least to minimize the effect of the paralysis as the baby grows. That is what I think.
Okay. Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. It was a very informative lecture, and let's hope we will see more of you very soon. And then thank you, sir. Thanks again for devoting your time for such learning, and thanks a lot for supporting our venture, Project Ask Physios. Thank you, sir. Please take
Thank
care.
you,
Sure.
Prerak. Yeah. Okay, bye. Thank you.